was going to ask, what was it about his work that
I
was
think
such an
that
influence?
kind of being able to kind of work in those areas and not have boundaries. They weren't confined to a kind of visual art of like looking and replicating something that was there. They were very much more of the kind of a mind and of thinking and of a kind of freedom to explore other areas. And we all know, he's great interested in kind of meditation, spirituality, and all of those things came into it. Dealing with quite explicit things, as Miro did, kind of sexuality and sex, and in the case of Miro, the repression of the Franco regime and how that influenced the work. And Alan Davie, seemingly to be this kind of free spirit and a kinds of work that escaped the boundaries of normal life.
So is it perhaps more an exploration of creativity and what is creativity?
I think certainly some of the work breaks boundaries of what's permissible in terms of creativity and a kind of an expanded view. But I think it is an expanded view of what kind of mind is and what what it can be, and it kind of signals that, and it signals kind of a different way of thinking really about the world.
What do you feel his influence has been on other artists over the years?
I'm not really sure, because he's not somebody that I talk to many artists. I often when teaching, I tell students to go look at his work because I think that there are similarities in what they're doing and that they'd find him interesting. There are very few artists that I've actually come across day to day that have said, "Oh, I'm a great fan of Alan Davie," or it's kind of quiet. It comes up in a way. It's not an obvious influence, but he is a presence in a way. So there are occasional people that I've spoken to who mention him, but not a lot. But I think he is there, as one of the significant abstract kind of painters, and very significant from the UK as being at that pivotal point and knowing all of those people that he did, and time away in Venice, and the Peggy Guggenheim links. You kind of have to acknowledge that as important. So maybe they weren't necessarily people that I knew, but I think an older generation knew of his work, and he was much more substantial within that. And I think it's the people that then followed on from him.
Yes, I think we've heard that he had a strong influence on David Hockney and on Damien Hirst as well, I think.
I hadn't realised that, and you're mentioning that, and it kind of makes sense. Though Hirst is a great grabber of things, I think. No. I mean, he there's a sense in which he would say anything that would advantaged his position, I think. Yeah. But I can understand in Hockney, because when you think about when Hockney was painting and Alan Davie was still was a very significant painter at that point. So I think of him as being connected with Blake and all of those people, having influence on those people that took up pop art in a way. That freedom and that kind of escaping. So I think I was thinking about Alan Jones as well. And that whole Kitai, I think there's kind of things about colour and exploration that touches on all of those people. And you have to look, you're coming back to that kind of, what you think about the themes and that kind of notion of escape. You have to think it was off the end of the 60s, and I think all of that had a great influence and was going on in his work, and very, kind of interesting.
Is there anyone who would be an obvious sort of successor, as it were, if that even makes any sense?
I'm not sure, because I've never spoken to him, but I would have thought that people like Julian Ayres and that whole kind of thick encrustic painting and whatever, and artists like that would have been influenced by him, and not necessarily been the Ayres, but I think you can see traces of the work going into lots of people, really.
I mean, we find in the gallery and in public draw jams where we've put up a few of his images and had the public come in and just have a go at spontaneous creativity.
Yes.
Well, we've had several hundred people come along and do that in the summer, and people who've never heard of him before, never seen it before, are very immediate. There's an immediate impact and resonance. It's interesting.
Absolutely. I was also thinking, as you talked, it might be very interesting to talk to some neurologists and people that deal with vision about. I mean, I think some of his imagery is very striking, and it hits a note with quite pure visual symbols in a way. And I wonder what the relationship is to the organisation of our visual cortex. I think it probably signals very strongly that some of those swirls and curls that we were just talking about, the snake forms and whatever, I think would be highly charged visually.
That's very interesting, because yes, in your work as well, exploring dendritic forms
and stuff
in the brain.
Yes,
how do we construct our images?
And I think if you went to his work, the kind of oppositional colour, because it's often you notice bits that are like a zebra crossing, and they're obviously that kind of boundary things that are the triggers to our visual cortex and neurons there, kind of are very directly appealing, and he uses a lot of that across a lot of his imagery. I mean, the two paintings that you pulled out as being your favourite paintings in the exhibition do exactly that, and the ones that I kind of like in the exhibition do exactly that. They're very appealing visually to, and if you kind of look at how the visual cortex work against these boundaries. And,
yes, I remember you telling me from some of your work with one of the neurologists that if you look at scientifically at the structure of, I think it was you telling me, a taxi driver's brain and a bus driver's brain, you can actually see a difference in the structure of the brain. Of course, we can't look at what Alan Davie's brain looked like.
But I think visual artists do get that, and there is some. You're talking about this relationship between paintings and people, and there definitely is. There isn't any other way, in a sense, other than through the arts, of exploring visually how things might be represented in the brain. And so there's the visual aspect, and there's what somebody's thinking that comes out into an immediacy in the painting. And I think that those are the two elements that we're reading. We stand in front of a painting, and it's somebody else's thoughts in a way, and how they organise and they think is put out onto that painting, and we read them in that way. We've talked about mirror neurons and the importance of mirror neurons as ways of reading paintings. And again, I think you can, and you also talked about the tactile nature of these paintings, and I think we feel that, we see it, and we replicate it inside ourselves tactically. And have those similar kinds of experiences, and I think that's how those things work. And I think, going back to my first impressions of him, he was somebody you could see was thinking in different ways, thinking and breaking boundaries about what might be in your brain. And I think it does follow on closely, and I think there's a strong link to the abstraction, abstract expressionism that then follow, but I think there's a very strong link to surrealism and what had occurred. And so you've got two pathways in a way. One to Jackson Pollock, de Kooning, and whatever, and significantly, and maybe Ashley Gorky. But on the other hand, I think you've got another channel which leads to Miro and to the surrealists in a way. And you could Max Ernst and people like that. I think they're another category that he, was bringing together.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that. I mean, just before we close, are there any other stories about Alan Davie, or that you'd like to share for our record, or experiences?
I don't have any other story. I mean, in a way, it's kind of interesting because, there's been that thing of always liking Alan Davie's work. There was my attempt to go and meet him when I was 18 or 19. I think I must have been 19. And that was about it. And he was somebody that was there and had a presence, but somebody I now think, I should have done more about trying to see him and have a conversation.
And by dint of fate, he was still alive here in Hartford when we were meeting here in Hartford.
I know, there's an irony. I would have,
2 or 3 miles away down the road. If only we'd known.
At that point, yes. And then that email comes through, and then it spins out. To me, it's extraordinarily pleasing to see how that conversation, how that email and conversation with you has led on to all of this. Really, it's fantastic.
All these little moments that lead to lots of other things.
Recognition. And I suppose for me, I mean, at some point, you know, I mean, in the various shows I've done, you mentioned David Hockney earlier. You know, I've ended up being in a couple of shows where my part has only been small in relationship, but shown with them. But it would be really nice at some point to maybe match up some of my early paintings and the things I was doing around with a show of Alan Davie's, or even more current work that still has a feel, and I feel that he was definitely part of my trajectory, seeing what was possible. That's the great thing about paintings and things that are left behind, is that they are still a very live conversation with a mind, with somebody that was doing something and making work in an age and had a particular kind of outlook, and how that outlook goes on and repeats and replicates and has echoes.